So I think we'll get started. We waited for a moment because people often come at the last minute, and so we just had a few more friends come in. It's really wonderful to see an almost full house. As you know, we have sort of slightly limited capacity still to keep people comfortably spaced, and we hope to increase the numbers as I think as weeks go by and we can sort of gauge how the virus is doing, etc. So I'm really very happy to see you here. This is the third of our conversations, and we had increasing numbers every time. So I think there's a little bit of word of mouth going on, and people come back to our events of sort of a little bit of a half an hour presentation, then some question and answers, and then we have some wine and food for you next in the next room. And it has been really wonderful so far and very convivial. Before I introduce our speaker, I should say I'm Dietrich Neumann. I'm the director of the John Nicholas Brown Center for Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage. And we've welcomed artists and architects so far. And tonight we have the planner for the city of Providence here. I wanted to mention Professor Bonnie Honig, my dear colleague, is here from Brown, and she is going to speak next week about her new book, Shell-Shocked Feminist Criticism After Trump. I greatly look forward to that. It's going to be exciting, and we'll have that conversation a week from now. And now it's my distinct pleasure to welcome Bob Azar. Many of you know him. He's Deputy Director of the Providence Department of Planning and Development. He's also Professor of the Practice of Urban Studies at Brown University. And he will talk about challenges and ideas for our city's urban future. Some of you know him because I noticed several of you had been to some of our bus tours in urban studies that we ran while I was over there for 6 years. And Bob very kindly and reliably did one bus tour every year, always sold out, of course, and showed us the secrets of the city of Providence. And he actually has worked for the city of Providence over 20 years, 21 years. You started here in the year 2000 and then climbed through the ranks. He had come after getting a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering at UMass Amherst, and then his Master of Community Planning from the University of Rhode Island, and then became a senior principal planner first, then director of current planning and development, then acting director of planning and development, and now he's deputy director of planning and development, which means anything that happens in new building activity and traffic planning, anything goes over his desk and gets either his approval or not. And it's just an amazing position to be in. And I'm so thrilled that you're here and you can share your insights and vision for the city of Providence. I should say, as you can probably imagine, this is a very demanding job. I imagine lots of players who call you up and have demands and ideas and pull you in different sides. So one needs calmness and a sense of realism and a good sense of humor as well. And all of this Bob brings to his presentation. So please help me welcome Bob Azar. So now I have to do this complex operation. Sorry, not yet. Share screen. And this is on, so I go to the meeting controls and I go full screen. All right, thanks, Dietrich. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about change in the built environment in Providence and how people react to that change, members of the public, and how city planners try to manage that change. As Dietrich said, I've been with the city for 21 years now. I've been through a couple of business cycles, booms and busts, and seen a lot of growth in the city. And growth can be really exciting. It can bring housing, it can bring needed services, it can bring jobs, but it can also provoke a lot of anxiety among people. And we planners
we try to moderate that anxiety. We try to ensure that change follows some sort of predictable path. But it's not always predictable. We can sometimes forecast where population is going and where we think the market is going, but there are things that happen that are out of everybody's control. And so, you know, we're always sort of in the middle of this dynamic. One of the reasons why we don't have a whole lot of control over the market is because just about all of the development that you see is not done by the government. It's done by the private sector. And it's done in response to economic conditions. The government, we don't have the ability in this country simply to say, we need housing, and then order the developers to build housing. We simply can't do that. As much as some of you might like it, we can't say, developers, you shall build a Trader Joe's. Although at every community meeting I've been to for a series, you know, years, that's what people say. The number one thing is they want a Trader Joe's. It doesn't really work that way. I'm going to talk a little bit about how it actually works. You know, the public does build some things. It builds city buildings, fire stations, city hall, parks, and so forth. It builds roads, but you know, just about everything you see coming out of the ground is built by private actors on private property, and it's our job to kind of set the rules, set the template for how that happens. And so, in that sense, we're regulators. And a regulator, it can have a couple of different meanings. You know, we're regulators in the sense that we write regulations. We set the regulations like zoning for exactly how parcels are allowed to get built. But we're also regulators in the sense of you know, this idea of managing change and growth. And we do that through plans. We engage the community, we write plans. Plans ultimately get turned into implementation documents like ordinances. These things all get adopted through a legislative process. So they become the framework, they become the rules that development has to follow. And in theory, these are transparent, predictable structures, the plans, the regulations. So the developers know what they can do on their property. Any property owner should know what they can do on their property. Neighborhood organizations, citizens, they should all be able to interpret and understand these structures so they can imagine what could possibly happen. Let's say there's a vacant lot across the street. What could go there? Well, you could consult the plans and the ordinances, and you could kind of figure out what could go there. And most people don't do that, of course. They like that vacant lot across the street. Maybe it has trees on it. Maybe it's a very pleasant place, and you know, but it's not theirs. It belongs to somebody else, and it could be developed sometimes. The other thing about planning and regulations is that it can be very complicated, because when you write plans, you're trying to mediate a lot of differences of opinion. People have different ideas about what they think should happen in the city, in a certain district, on a certain parcel of land. So sometimes plans can be a little ambiguous. Sometimes they can be contradictory, internally contradictory. And then on top of it, regulations can be very complicated. And you know, we strive to make our regulations as simple and as transparent as possible. But in a city like this, that has a very complex built environment, a very long history of development, those rules and regulations necessarily are sometimes very complex, and also in response to the demands of residents through their elected officials to impose strict regulations in certain places. Sometimes those rules and regulations are convoluted and almost designed to not allow for a lot of development. So while the planners can help facilitate the discussions and can help work through what the rules and regulations are, we are part of a political process of it's sensitive. So sometimes these processes can be a little bit opaque, and a lot of times people sort of see things that happen. They might wonder what happens, but they don't really get involved. They don't really care until maybe they get a letter in the mail that says your neighbor has applied for a variance to build a 10-story building on that vacant lot next door or across the street. Or even worse, all of a sudden you wake up to the sound of a bulldozer and all the trees on the vacant lot across the street are gone, and someone is preparing to put in a foundation. So then people start to get very interested in what these rules are, and they want to understand. So what I'd like to do is try to demystify this process a little bit, give you a sense of what some of the big issues that we're facing in the city of Providence, and these are not unique to Providence. These are nationwide, especially around issues of housing, and then maybe get into some sort of a discussion about what you folks think. All right, so this is how the planning process starts. Every plan that we do always has graphics like this that show that we engage the public. We don't always start from scratch. We sort of have a sense of what should happen, but it's very important that we engage the public because, like I said, this is a political process, and the elected officials that get into approving these documents need to know that their constituents, if they're not happy with it, at least they can live with it. At least we can somehow find some sort of consensus. And we ask big picture questions. How do we grow? What sorts of buildings should go where? You know, what should they look like? How tall tall should they be? What kind of uses do you want to see? And where should these buildings go? You know, we have a pattern that's fairly established, like a lot of cities: tall buildings in downtown, shorter buildings in neighborhoods, commercial buildings in commercial corridors. You know, we like mixed use. So, you know, we try to get a sense of what people like. This public engagement process is not perfect. Not everybody is involved. It's very common that residents come to these things, but developers and property owners don't. They kind of feel like they can work the politics on the back end when they want to build something. So sometimes these processes end up being, you know, not to diminish it, but sometimes they become sort of feel-good exercises in listening, in participating, and sometimes the plans can be a little unrealistic. They can be sort of visions that may not come to pass because the private sector may not elect to build what people want to see. You know, people think that they want something, but the developers, like if you're a retail developer, you're doing your own studies about where the money is, how much people are willing to spend, where your competitors are, where the land is, and that results in some sort of development. So what people say they want is not always what gets developed. Housing developers. A lot of people these days say they want affordable housing. Housing developers sometimes can build affordable housing if they can get the right kinds of subsidies to do it. But if they can't make money in the private market building affordable housing, and they can make money building market rate housing, luxury housing, that's what they're going to build. Okay, so but we do this engagement, and it is important, and we do get ideas from people who know the city well, they know their neighborhoods, and it often is extremely helpful to do this. So then we write plans. These documents, this Providence Tomorrow is the city's comprehensive plan. It's been in effect since most recently adopted in 2014. And it sort of sets this very general vision of where we want to go as a city. And it talks about all sorts of things. It talks about transportation, housing, community services, art, culture, and tourism, parks and recreation. And for me, the most important part of this, because it's the most binding part of this document, is the element that talks about land use. And it talks about where we should grow and how we should grow. And it starts off very general. This map really is sort of a very broad picture of the city in terms of where the development should be. And it's primarily these dark blue areas, downtown, the former industrial areas, and then the red lines show commercial corridors where we think there's a lot of opportunity for growth. And then everything else is considered to be areas of stability. In other words, there will be growth, there will be development, but it's going to happen in a way that's kind of consistent with what's already there. The change is higher density, taller buildings would be in the blue and the red. That was our vision in 2007, and then reiterated in 2014. That's been our policy since the mid 2000s. We take that broad planning language and these broad visions of where we grow, and we translate that into regulation. That we call zoning. And this is the zoning map that is something I consult many times a day. It's, for me, probably the most important document I look at in my job. And I would argue probably the most important tool that planners have to shape and influence the built environment. The colors tell you what the zones are. The letters have, give the names to the zones, and they speak to, along with the regulations, the actual code, very specifically. On this parcel of land in this zone, you're allowed to build this tall. You have to have this much parking. You have to have this much open space. On and on and on in minute detail. And very few people really know this document. I would say that in the city of Providence, there are probably three of us that know it pretty comprehensively, and a handful of others who know the sections that they work in most often, which is kind of interesting because there are a lot more lawyers out there in the community that know this document just as well as I do. Sometimes they point out things in this document that I thought I knew. I thought I knew that they would be interpreted in a particular way, but when read in a different context, there can be a different interpretation. So it's a very complex document. It's very interwoven, but it is the law of the land. And if you want to build anything, you have to know what this document says about what's allowed. All right, so sometimes you do these plans and you write these ordinances and you get exactly what you want. You would think that that's obvious, but it's not. As planners, we learn that very often you don't get what you anticipated, but sometimes you do. This is a perfect example of something that checks almost all of the boxes. This development was allowed by right. So the grocery store and the housing were both allowed on this parcel. The height of the buildings is compliant. The building is built to the street with a storefront, just like we like. Parking is concealed underground and or on the sort of on the first level of the apartment building with a small parking lot next to the building, like we like to see. It's bringing a market to what we would consider a food desert on the west side of Providence. The housing happens to be, it's got a subsidy, so there's some affordable housing in this complex. So it really nails it across the board. Downtown, this is a building that was developed by Buff Chase, a guy who's done a lot of revitalization in downtown. A new building designed to fit in terms of massing, the fenestration, the windows and doors, the storefront, the building materials, the height relative to other buildings, a traditional sort of architectural style, which some people favor, some people don't. But this again, nailed it. Gave us housing and mixed use in downtown. Another one of Buff's projects, this building in the foreground is a new building, but it was designed in a mass to kind of reflect the rhythm of these sort of narrower, mid-rise traditional buildings. You kind of don't know when this building was designed and when it was built. I mean, it's brick and glass storefronts and painted wood with traditional detailing of the windows and the cornice and the lintels and all the details that Dietrich could speak to better than I. But it works. Is it the only solution for this parcel that would be ideal? No, but it happens to work. And of course, we're going to get our Trader Joe's. I probably shouldn't say it because it's not official. But again, a development that's going to have a market and it's going to have housing and it's going to have other commercial spaces right at the base of Wickenden Street. Again, good developers. They bought into that vision, and it just so happens that what they want to build, there's going to be a market for it. I think Trader Joe's is going to do just fine. Urban market. This is what they show us whenever we see renderings. They don't put names. They do things like this. Now, that's the first category of that makes my life easy. When a developer comes in and says, "This is what I want to do," we say, "We love this. We give it our wholehearted support. Approved." Of course, we don't get to do that ourselves. We have to work with boards and commissions, and there's a whole process that these things go through. But we have some influence with the boards and commissions, and we like this kind of thing. Sometimes there are things that fit with the rules and regulations and the plans just perfectly, but you still get residents kind of pushing back and saying that shouldn't have happened. So here's an interesting example of that. And Sue, my wife here, she knows because we were always driving around the city, and I say, "Stop! I got to get out. I got to take pictures of this because I'm going to use it in a presentation." Actually 5 single-family houses developed on a vacant parcel of land, not a vacant parcel of land, a very large parcel of land that has a mansion on it, but lots and lots of open space. In a city, lots and lots of open space is a development opportunity, okay? It's not the park, it's not the privately owned park in your neighborhood. It's not the relief from the urban built environment. It's development potential. This land has huge value for housing. And so people can subdivide. And the plan says this is a single family zone for single family houses. And that's what the developer built. You like these houses? Yeah. Well, somebody likes them because they paid at least $1.5 million for each one of these houses. Okay. Here's another one that was battle. Remember, I showed you those red lines on the map that say these are growth corridors. What that says is we will allow you some extra height and some extra density because you're on a corridor that's well served by public transit. And if you build dense here, you don't have to build dense in the neighborhoods where people get nervous. This is a 5-story building, and this probably was in court for over a year because the neighbors thought that 5 stories was too tall. There it is. There it is in context with some 3-story buildings around it. We supported this project. This is in a historic district. This got design reviewed by the Historic District Commission, probably 5-6 meetings to get to where it is. But this is not liked by a lot of folks. This is a 12, 13-story building in downtown, which is where the tall buildings go, right? That's what our comprehensive plan says. This zone is allows for buildings of up to 100 feet. And if you do ground floor retail, you can actually go taller. That's what the developer did. The developer got sued by his neighbor, went to court. The judge said that the board missed one word in its required findings and sent it back. And the developer, instead of continuing to fight, because he knew he was probably going to be back in court, did this. He hasn't built it yet, but that's the approved plan. That or that. So abutters have rights. You know, what these ordinances say when we make decisions, when our boards make decisions, it may not be the final word. It is during up until the end of the appeal period. There could be a 20 or 30-day appeal period. Once that's done, game over, the project can move ahead. But in that period, an abutter has rights and can challenge. And if the abutter claims that the city misinterpreted the rules or there was some sort of miscarriage of justice, then a judge could overturn the decision. And that does happen. Then you get things like this. Like I said, we can't predict what people are going to bring to us. And when Jason Fain came into our office with this proposal for buildings that would be in excess of 600 feet tall, we said, well, our zoning map says that this is 100 feet, 100-foot zone. We'd like you to build a building that's about 100 feet tall, maybe a little taller, do some ground floor retail, you can get some bonuses, do some affordable housing, you can get some bonuses, but no, this is what he wanted. And in this case, this is a situation where it doesn't conform to the regulation. So the regulation can change. He actually went to our city council and through a very long process of, oh, by the way, before he went to our city council, the landowner, which is the I-195 commission, said, not three towers. Let's start with one. Okay, so this is, he went from this plan and he did a complete vast redo of the plan. You know, took all of 30 seconds to Photoshop out the other 2 towers. And then this was the plan, right? 1 tower. And then the 195 commission said, you know, we like the idea of a tower. And keep in mind, the 195 commission is a state agency that owns this former highway land. They have the right to sell it, but at the time we regulated it. The law that created that commission says they own the land, they can sell the land, but the city regulates it. So as much as the state wanted to see this, and there were a lot of people in the state, especially the General Assembly, that wanted to see this tower, Fain had to deal with us. So Fain thought that for us, it was a matter of design. He wanted to know if we liked the building. And we said, well, we don't like the building. So he said, okay, well, I'll redesign the building. Do you like it now? And we said, well, no, we don't like it now. And at the end of the day, He had to go through a very messy process with our city council to try and get this zoning changed. And this is what, this is one of the posters that's pronounced no thank you, no thank you. Public hearings, that's our son's piano teacher behind the poster there. It's Rhode Island, you know, it's Providence. Ultimately, Fain got the council to approve 600-foot zoning. It was a split decision, but they approved it. So that's the rule, you know, the council can pass the law, they can also change the law. But the state was so upset with the way this happened, what Fain was put through by the city of Providence, that the General Assembly stripped the city of its zoning authority for the 195 land. Zoning authority comes from the state. They delegate it to the cities and towns. In my career, this is the one and only time that I can think of where the state actually took that authority back. So within that 195 corridor, this is a zone that the city doesn't have control over, even though it's within our jurisdiction. Of course, the builders wanted to see this. It was a circus. Okay, here's another thing. Sometimes, you know, our regulation is supposed to be transparent in the sense that you read the regulations, you know what you can build, and you should go and build it. But that's not the way it always works. We have things like historic district commissions. We have overlay districts where everything on the exterior of the building is regulated. You cannot replace your windows. You cannot change your siding. You can't re-roof. You can't put an addition, a skylight, a solar panel. You can't do anything without first getting approval from our historic district commission. Historic districts actually confer on the public a certain aspect of ownership of the exterior of the building. A lot of people like that because what it means is this is a very strict set of rules, and I don't want my neighbors to do anything that might devalue my house. But that means that we all have to submit to this extreme regulation. And this is a body of unelected people. They're experts, they're historic preservation experts, but they deny a lot of things. This is a little cottage across the street. And this addition here, designed by the esteemed architect Friedrich St. Florian, this took 9 months and 5 or 6 meetings in front of the Historic District Commission to design an addition to a single family house. This went from a single family house to a single family house. No new dwelling units created. And we're in the midst of what I would consider to be a housing crisis. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just pointing out to you that this is what historic district zoning is like. Okay. Here's another thing where we get calls for strict regulation all the time. These signs popped up all over College Hill in response to some landlords that are buying houses and renting them to students. Now, students are people. Students need a place to live. Brown University, RISD, Providence College, they don't have enough housing on campus to house all of their students. So students live off campus. Sometimes they live in large households. Sometimes they live in houses amidst houses where families live. Sometimes they keep odd hours. Sometimes they put couches on their front porches and drink beverages out of red cups and maybe leave those red cups overnight. And maybe those red cups get blown by the wind into the street. And maybe their garbage overflows, and maybe there's a ping pong table in the driveway. People don't like that. They don't like students amidst them. They like being near a college. It is College Hill after all, So they knew they were moving into a college area. So we've gone so far as to regulate the number of students that can live together in a house. And of course, as soon as we put that regulation into place, we got sued by one of these landlords, went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and the court said that we're allowed to do it. Believe it or not, students are not a protected class because there's nothing about them that's protected by law. It's not age discrimination, it's not race, it's not disability, et cetera, et cetera. So we can do this. Enforcing it's a different issue. You know, try knocking on the door of a student house and asking who lives here and are you college students? You know, there might be 100 people in the house, but none of them are going to admit to living there. So, you know, it becomes complicated, but a major land use issue. And then one of the biggest, probably the biggest real estate developer in the city of Providence is Brown University. And Brown University is can be very controversial in terms of their decisions. They're probably they probably have the best track record at historic preservation in Providence, simply because they own so many historic buildings and so many buildings in historic districts. But they also probably demolish more property than anybody else in the city. And they also build big buildings because they have big needs. They have new professors coming into town that need you know, lots of lab space or office space, or you know, and they want to build housing for their students. And this is one of those interesting issues. It's kind of a no-win for the university. The neighbors don't like the students in the neighborhood. So the college says, okay, we'll build dorms on our campus on land that's zoned for dorms and zoned for density. But guess what? There's a petition that's circulating with 1,000 signatures on it right now saying, President Paxson, don't build these monstrosities, these monstrous dorms you know, on your campus, but in the midst of our neighborhood. So what's Brown to do? You know, some would say Brown should stop growing right now. Brown should not do anything. But is that realistic? Okay. So I'm going to kind of wrap this up by saying that again, cities are always changing. They change in unpredictable and sometimes uncontrollable ways. You know, the economy, job loss, job gain, recessions, pandemics, they all affect the economy. They all affect what people want to build. They all affect the way people are occupying buildings. You know, we have office buildings downtown. They can't convert them to residential fast enough because the office market is dying and the residential market is through the roof. And speaking of the residential market, it's through the roof. It's a huge problem. If you own a house, you know, you're lucky because that house is worth a lot of money and it's increasing in value. And it's increasing in value because there's huge demand for housing. And why is there huge demand for housing right now? A bunch of reasons. The census numbers just came out. We gained about 13,000 people in Providence. We're up over 190,000 now. It's not a huge number, 13,000 in a decade, but that translates to close to 5,000 dwelling units that have to be built over that course of the decade to house these people. You know, again, compared to some boom towns, we're not Seattle or Portland or Boston or DC, but that in a city of 18 square miles, where you can't build out, you know, we can't annex the city of Cranston or North Providence. You know, we've got to work with the footprint that we have. The household size has declined over time. Households used to be much bigger than they are today. The primary building type that we're seeing right now is apartment buildings with 1-bedroom apartments. Because that's the way young people want to live these days. You know, when I graduated college, I wanted to live with my friends in an apartment, you know, and many people would want to live with 3 or 4 or 5 of their friends in a house or something like that. These days, for whatever reason, young folks want to live by themselves or with a partner in a 1-bedroom apartment. And as household size declines, you need more units to house the same number of people. The market is not keeping pace. We have a demand for on the affordable spectrum. We did a study that shows that the demand for affordable housing is over 800 dwelling units in a year, and we only produce about 500 dwelling units in a decade, 50, right? There are 3,000 more households at the high end that want housing in Providence than the market is producing. So what happens? Those wealthy people are buying housing that otherwise would have been for people with middle of the road kinds of salaries. So that pushes the market up for everybody. There's going to be an article, I think it's going to be in the paper tomorrow. It's online today in the Journal that talks about housing. There's a Brown economist actually that's quoted saying that we are at or near the top in measures of restrictiveness in terms of our land use practices. This is Rhode Island. I would say Providence is probably better than a lot of our suburban neighbors in terms of what we allow. Actually, we allow the highest density that you'll find anywhere in Rhode Island. So we're much more permissive, but we are still very restrictive, especially in historic districts. We're also near the bottom in what's called elasticity, or how responsive the real estate market is to changes in supply and demand. So we are just about the hardest place to actually grow the housing supply in the country. Hawaii and Rhode Island, for some reason, are at the the top or the bottom. So we need more housing. Desperately, we need more housing. I feel like when my children are ready to buy a house, and if they want to buy a house in Providence, they're not going to be able to buy a house in Providence. And the way that I and my family have been able to grow whatever wealth we have is through real estate. And the way it started for me was to buy a 2-family house and rent out one of the units. It's the dream for living in a city. It's a way to live affordably and build equity. So that's a huge problem. So the question is, just like we started with the plan, the big questions of where should we grow and how should we grow? We're still asking that today, and we need to really go back to the drawing board to figure out how we're going to solve this real serious problem, in a way that people can live with it. I mean, I think what you're going to hear from a lot of folks is, yes, Providence should grow, but it shouldn't grow next to where I live. It should grow somewhere else. Okay. So I think I'm going to end it there, and maybe we can have a little discussion about what you think about growth and development and where you think we should grow. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. 288 Blackstone Boulevard.
Yes.
I know I'm kind of curious as to why it didn't fit the realm of being covered by the Historic Commission. And was your department involved? At least that's my understanding. Was your department involved with changing from 10 to the last 9? What is? how is that?
Okay, all right.
The historical.
That's a great question. So 288 Blackstone Boulevard is a up until a couple of years ago was a very large estate, a stately house facing Blackstone Boulevard, and about five acres or so, maybe a little bit less than that. But we have just a handful of estates left in the city like that. As I mentioned, these large plots of land are really development sites. We don't have regulations that say, if it's an estate, it shall stay an estate. We don't do that. What we say is, this is a single family zone, and it's intended for detached single family houses on parcels of land of at least 5,000 square feet, or in some cases 7,500 square feet. That parcel has two different zoning districts. So when you take that land, imagine everything gone from it, and imagine parceling it out, you could get about 10 lots there. And that's what the owner of that estate, or the developer that was going to buy that estate, came to us and said, this is what we are allowed to do, and this is what we want to do. That's what's called a major subdivision. It has to go for a hearing in front of our planning board, but it's allowed by right. And do I want to see that estate carved up into 10 houses? Not especially. Do I think that the house that exists on that parcel of land is nice, or was nice at the time? Yes. But one of the questions you asked was, why wasn't that in a historic district? Because if it was in a historic district, then they would not have been able to tear down the house, and there might have been some more. They still probably could subdivide it, but every one of the new houses would be reviewed by the Historic District Commission. The simple answer to your question is that historic districts are mapped. They're adopted by ordinance by the city council. So the answer is, it's not in a historic district because the city council did not put it in a historic district. Has there been over time attempts to put areas of that Blackstone neighborhood in a local historic district? And by the way, very important distinction. That area is in what's called a National Register District, which is recognized at the state and the federal level, which means that if you want to get certain tax credits to fix up your house, you have to do it in accordance with rules and regulations. But if you don't want those tax credits, that state and national historic designation is meaningless. The only thing that's meaningless is meaningful is the local historic district. And the answer is that the political process dictates where our historic districts are, and the political process did not result in that becoming a historic district. And in fact, the couple of times when it was floated, there was definitely enough pushback in that neighborhood against historic district zoning, so it didn't happen. So, and then the next question, why did it go from 10 lots? It's now 8. Why did it go from 10 lots to 8? And here's the reason. And I'm gonna sound maybe a little well, you can judge how I sound. There were a bunch of neighbors who didn't like that this developer had the right to build 10 lots. They knew very well that the rules allowed for 10 lots, but they knew that if they challenged this subdivision, it was approved, the appeal period was running, there were abutters that had rights. They knew that if they challenged it and took it to court, it was going to cost the developer a huge amount of money in lawyers' fees and in time. Time is the enemy of developers. This developer had an option on the land that might have expired in 4 or 6 months or something like that. He didn't want to have to renegotiate that. There are carrying costs to these options. So the neighbors hired a lawyer who filed an appeal, and all of the grounds on which he filed the appeal, in my opinion, were absurd. But it goes into the system. First, it goes to the zoning board of appeal. Then it goes up to Superior Court, month after month after month. The developer says, I'm going to cut my losses because I'm hemorrhaging money. So he made a deal to cut it down to 8 lots. And guess what the deal also included? He had to pay the legal fees of the lawyer represented by the abutter. So people can very cynically manipulate this process to their own ends. It's not just the developers that have the money and the lawyers. In wealthy areas of town, chances are less is going to get built because of wealthy people who hire lawyers. In poorer parts of town, you don't have those kinds of options. So you tend to see historic districts in the wealthier areas of town, and this is a way of keeping things just the way you like them, and also you see skyrocketing property values because of that. And again, if you own a house, and you want to accumulate wealth in your house, it's a good way to do it. But you got to keep in mind that you're probably going to be foreclosing the opportunity for other people to live in your neighborhood. Question in the back there.
By the way, especially the main tower. So I went to Providence in the early 80s. Others noticed the same thing. But one of the very, very charming things to us was that in the Boston area, even heavily traffic streets like Bear Street or Brook Street, old streets, aside from the Brown Science Library, the big building where almost everything was of a small scale, platform size houses and some shops and civil related around North End. I remembering this, I went looking up small programs there before the big changes in Brook, before the changes there, found very little. But I just remember if we walked together down Brook Street alone now, say from Transit on up to where Brook Street meets Hoops. We would see now the streetscape that is dramatically changed as I realized with some of it in brown, some of it in big box, apartment. Fully understand cities change. But sometimes drip by drip, battle by battle, we lose something large, the whole feeling of the neighborhood. And you may win a specific battle over this property or this property here, and somehow maybe others don't care about this. I think we've lost there, and we've lost Brook. We've lost the character of those areas to me. And I just want to ask your thoughts about, is there any way to think long term and in terms of streetscapes?
Well, yeah. I mean, I look, back to the question, where do we grow and how do we grow? We made a decision, the city, planning department, the city council, we made a decision in 2012, 2014 to extend the commercial zoning from Thayer Street to Brook Street. Sometimes you do that and absolutely nothing happens. In this case, we kind of knew what was going to happen because that's where the highest demand is for real estate. The highest per square foot sales are right there in that block, like Thayer and Angel and Waterman and so forth. Do you want to so constrain the development market so that people can't build where they want to build and they can't get the rents that they want to get? Do we want to basically say to the private sector, we don't want you to build, and therefore we don't want you to pay taxes, and therefore we don't want to have that revenue to operate our city? We depend on property taxes and we depend on growth. That's a consideration. We have to balance that with these issues about what people perceive as community character, scale and charm and so forth. What I would argue is that it's sort of like it's like conservation of natural resources. If you don't want the forest to be developed, you need to buy the forest and you need to put it into a conservation zone. You need to protect it in perpetuity so that it will always be there. You kind of need to do the same thing in a city. If you don't want anything to change in a particular area because it's so special, you need to put it in a historic district and it's not going to change. It's going to take 9 months for someone to add on to a house. In my opinion, when we have a housing crisis and we need housing and people are willing to build high density housing in particular areas, you have to allow that to happen. You just have to allow it to happen, because if it doesn't happen, California, who's been to San Francisco recently? Who's been to Portland? Who's been to Seattle? There are people, thousands and thousands of people living in cars and they have jobs. They're living in campers parked on the street and they have to drive around and park in a different place every day. They have jobs. So big buildings, high density, growing population. We should consider ourselves fortunate if we're growing and we can accommodate that. But yes, it's going to be in some cases at the loss of a certain amount of character. Yes, in the back.
Yeah, sort of thinking about that, I think that there are parts of Thayer where you really, if you're in a car on Thayer, awful experience. Like it's really just stop and go.
Good. We don't want you in a car on Thayer. We want you walking.
The fact that driving down Thayer is not a good experience, not to keep people from driving down Thayer and sort of like for parking. And at the same time, there are these portions of downtown, like right at the intersection of Ladysmith and Westminster, where you could just like walk in a circle, like turn all the way around.
Sure.
In the middle of the day,
Yep.
not see a single person.
Yep.
And you have this parcel of land right behind the Citizen Bank building that I'm pretty sure is owned by the state. And as part of the Capital Center redevelopment project, it just served as perfect now. That could fit the largest building in town, probably within existing.
Sure it could. Sure it could.
Right.
But you know why it's not developed?
No. My question is that do you think that sort of what feels sort of like an inappropriate burden of like not pedestrian burden. I think that I don't think any place in the city can be private for pedestrians. They're just sort of like people in cars having that maybe discrepancy between what the built environment is really laid out for and how it's used. If that's a natural part of the city, or if that's sort of a shortcoming of policy.
The fact that it's hard to drive down Thayer Street and that it's easy to turn your car around at Weybosset and Westminster, is that?
Well, if the Senator City doesn't function as a city.
Okay, so as I said, I can't tell developers where to build. I can entitle the property. I can say, if you're going to build here, these are the rules for building. But I can't say to the development community, keep in mind, people who own private property have rights. They have the rights to develop their property. And if they think they can make money, they might decide to develop their property. So, Thayer Street happens to be a place where developers want to build things because there's a market. You can get high rents, you can get commercial, you can get housing and so forth. In certain areas in downtown, there are vacant lots and nobody wants to build there because they don't think they can make money. I can't tell developers who own a piece of property on Thayer Street, don't build here, build in downtown. I do not have that ability. So is it a failing of policy? I think it's a market reality that some places are more attractive than others.
But isn't the market shaped by policy and transportation?
Nah, yeah, somewhat, yeah. But what are we gonna do? Widen Thayer Street? You
Well,
can't.
No, actually makes Thayer Street thinner. If you use policy in order to drive the way that people make their, like, that's the entire way that the modern nation functions. Subsidies are all about getting people to do things they don't want to do.
Yeah, but look, Thayer Street is a street that has existed at a certain width that starts at the edge of one building and goes to the edge of another building, and there are sidewalks and there's driving lanes and parking lanes. There's X amount of right of way. We did make some significant changes to the sidewalks on Thayer Street with bump outs and street furniture and things like that. There's only so much you can do, and you could arguably you could widen the sidewalks and narrow the street, but that's going to make it even harder to drive. It's all about finding balances. I mean, if you have an idea about what you think the cross section of Thayer Street should be, and if you think it should be different than what it is today, I'd love to see it. Maybe you could sketch it out and show it to me. I'd be happy to see that. We get great ideas from the public all the time. How are we doing on time?
Since I just saw the
Battery's running low.
battery is running low, I wonder if this is a signal that we should sort of close down slowly the questions and go over and have some glass of wine and move on to.
How about one more? How about one more question?
One more. It's
Yeah.
up to you. One more
Yeah,
question.
I'm gonna go all the way to the back.
So around all the topics and stuff.
I think I know this guy.
Yeah.
Yarrow, how are you?
Hi, I'm a RISD student that walked into Bob's office and said, I have a great idea for downtown and how to bring public art into spaces. And I want to thank you for all your support and help. And now we have paths for sculptures and gardens that are filtering water and a place for local art to be placed. And a pedestrian friendly downtown that allows people to mingle and do stuff.
That's right. An idea like from out of the blue, this guy just showed up in a internal staff meeting that we were having. And we were all sort of looking at each other asking, did you invite this guy? Did you invite this guy? And we didn't kick him out because he was offering to contribute to the vitality of the city by beautifying. We were planning certain open spaces that were going to be mostly easy to maintain concrete, because our DPW, they know how to maintain concrete. They don't know how to maintain plants. But Yarrow wanted to do interesting things with art and landscaping, and we humored him, and he did some great things. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, I was just wanted to say thank you for all of your generosity and support. And these challenges are complicated for a reason. That's just a testament of the passion of this community at large, and the diversity of the people that things are interested in. And it's made the city so interesting. We have more than 25 neighborhoods that are all uniquely different. You can walk up and down College Hill and see, wide vast diversity of gardens and flowers and plants and sidewalks, but that's fascinating. And I think for you to step up and to take that on as a challenge, I think is really interesting. And I look forward to the future. I think we as a city have a lot of challenges, and we're trying to find urban spaces and how to mediate all those things, and sort of how do you build a short-term and long-term accommodate everyone's needs. But I think that's part of these lectures, is part of, bringing minds together and coming up with interesting conversations over a glass of wine or something else. And, how do we sort of bring those conversations in a way that people will feel happy?
It's such a perfect.
Good.
First of all, thank you, your phone of Avenue concept brought us all the murals downtown, and they presented here last week, which was fantastic, and I want to thank you for that. And before I thank our speaker, I just want to say we're very cautious at Brown, so the rules say, of course, when you eat and drink next door, which is what we invite you to do now, you can take off your mask, but you should keep a certain amount of safe distance, ideally 6 feet, wherever you can do, and otherwise you should put the mask back on. But we're really happy to see you all here and invite you over. But most importantly, I want to thank 3 people. I don't know if I see her right now. Reese is an undergraduate student who welcomed you at the door and organized the food and the wine. And there's also Bridget, who also helped set everything up, and we're mostly grateful. Oh, there's Reese, exactly. And Bridget is somewhere nearby, so when you see them, thank you very much. Thank you, Rob Azar, for this eye-opening reality check.
Yeah.